They called us a power couple, the Langstons, 30 years of marriage, 3 houses, and 1 carefully curated illusion. I am Isolde Langston, though these days I wonder if that name was ever truly mine or just another piece of property in Daniel's collection. Every anniversary, Daniel bought me diamonds, and every year, I smiled for the cameras, my face frozen in the expression of contentment that society expected from a woman of my station. What they never saw was the distance that had become our true home, the growing chasm between what we appeared to be and what we had become. He stopped looking at me years ago, not because I'd changed, but because his reflection in younger eyes made him feel immortal. I watched it happen slowly, like watching frost creep across a window. First, the lingering glances at waitresses. Then the late nights at the office. Finally, the perfume that wasn't mine was clinging to his collar, jasmine where there should have been roses. I said nothing. I learned early in our marriage that Daniel valued silence above honesty, appearance above truth. So I became what he needed, the perfect wife, the flawless hostess, the woman who knew when to smile and when to disappear. Our 30th anniversary would be the grandest yet. A black-tie dinner at our estate, sponsored by his company, Langston Holdings. 200 guests, live orchestra, champagne fountains, and ice sculptures shaped like swans. I'd spent months planning it, or at least, he thought I had. In truth, I'd been planning something else entirely. Because when a woman spends decades learning her husband's weaknesses, cataloging every lie, memorizing every pattern, her silence becomes the sharpest weapon. And I had been sharpening mine for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I started keeping records 3 years ago, when I first suspected. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise an alarm. Just small observations in a leather journal I kept locked in my grandmother's antique desk. The nights he claimed to be working late. The mysterious charges on credit cards I wasn't supposed to see. The way he flinched when his phone buzzed during dinner. The first real clue came from a mistake too small to ignore, a receipt left on his desk in the home office where I rarely ventured. It wasn't for jewelry, or flowers, or even the yacht he bragged about to his golf partners. It was for a luxury apartment downtown, one I'd never seen, in a building I'd never heard him mention. The amount on the receipt made my breath catch, $8,500 for monthly rent. For an apartment I knew nothing about. I sat in his leather chair, holding that slip of paper, feeling something shift inside me. Not heartbreak, I'd processed that emotion years ago. This was something colder, sharper. Clarity. I visited the apartment that afternoon, dressed in designer casual wear as if curiosity were a form of innocence. The building was modern, all glass and steel, with a doorman who looked like he cost as much as the rent. The concierge greeted me warmly when I mentioned my husband's name. "Mrs. Langston," he said, his smile professional and knowing. "Mr. Langston's already upstairs. Shall I ring up?" I smiled, the expression I'd perfected over 3 decades. "I'll surprise him. It's our anniversary month." He handed me a key card without hesitation. Apparently, I was expected, or at least, a Mrs. Langston was. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt like descending into another dimension. My reflection in the mirrored walls showed a woman I barely recognized, elegant, composed, with eyes as cold as winter rain. The door to Unit 2304 opened to a scent of jasmine, my scent, from years ago, before Daniel decided it was too old-fashioned for his tastes. On the marble counter sat a half-eaten cake with a single candle. The note beside it, written in Daniel's familiar scrawl, read, "Happy first anniversary, darling. Many more to come. 30 years for me. 1 for her." I didn't cry. I'd forgotten how. Instead, I walked through the apartment, cataloging everything. The king-sized bed with expensive sheets. The walk-in closet is filled with designer dresses in size 4. The bathroom counter was cluttered with makeup and perfume bottles. A second toothbrush next to one that matched the set in our master bedroom. I took photos with my phone, careful and methodical. Then I left, nodding pleasantly to the concierge on my way out. That night, I watched Daniel sleep, the man who had built our fortune on charm and betrayal. His face was peaceful, almost boyish, and for a moment, I remembered the love I once defended to my mother, who warned me he was too ambitious, too smooth, too hungry for things that sparkled. But pity and pain share the same room, only one gets to stay. I chose pain because it would fuel what came next. At breakfast the following morning, I wore his favorite perfume, the new one he'd bought me last Christmas, probably after his mistress suggested it, and asked about his day. He talked endlessly about investors, market opportunities, and the real estate development deal that would change everything. I nodded, listening, memorizing every lie. He didn't notice the small flash drive on my keychain, hidden among the usual clutter of a woman's accessories. It contained photos from the apartment, bank statements I'd quietly copied from his home office, and recordings from the nanny cam I'd installed in his study months ago, the one disguised as a decorative book on the shelf. When he left for the office, I stood by the window of our bedroom, looking out over the manicured grounds that had once made me feel like a princess. Now they felt like the walls of a very expensive prison. I whispered to myself, "You just celebrated the wrong anniversary." For weeks, I prepared like a soldier sewing her uniform, each stitch deliberate and precise. I smiled at his mistress's social media posts. Once I found her, it wasn't hard. Her name was Sienna, 26, an entrepreneur and lifestyle consultant whose lifestyle was clearly being consulted by my husband. She foolishly tagged locations, our villa in the Hamptons when I was supposedly visiting my sister, the yacht during what Daniel called business retreats, and even the apartment building I'd already visited. Each post was a gift, more evidence for the collection I was building. I followed his transactions through the credit card statements that arrived at our home, the ones he thought I never looked at. I tracked his travel logs through the airline rewards program he'd arrogantly linked to our shared email. And I discovered the charity accounts, 3 of them, that he used to hide stolen money, funneling funds through fake donations to organizations that existed only on paper. Daniel wasn't just unfaithful. He was unethical, possibly criminal. And I was going to make sure the world knew both. My lawyer, Olivia Chen, was a shark in Chanel suits. We'd been friends since college, before I became Mrs. Langston and she became the most feared divorce attorney in the state. I met her at a cafe 30 miles from our home, taking back roads and paying in cash. When I showed her what I'd collected, her eyes widened. "Isolde, this is extensive." "I've had time," I said simply. She flipped through the documents, her expression shifting from shock to something like admiration. "You're playing with fire." I smiled, tasting my coffee. Fire doesn't scare what's already burned. We spent 3 hours planning. Olivia explained what would hold up in court and what wouldn't. She helped me open a private account, under my maiden name, Isolde Thorne, and showed me how to move assets quietly, legally, within the bounds of our prenuptial agreement that Daniel had assumed would protect him but actually had loopholes large enough to drive a Mercedes through. "Document everything," she instructed. "Every gift he buys her, every lie he tells investors, every email he deletes, I need copies." I became a ghost in my own home, moving through rooms where I'd once felt like a queen, now feeling like a spy in enemy territory. I didn't want vengeance and rage, hot and messy and easy to dismiss as a woman scorned. I wanted vengeance in rhythm, measured, elegant, final. Daniel noticed the change before he understood it. "You've been quiet lately," he said one night, sipping bourbon in his study, the same room where I'd installed 3 different recording devices. "Just grateful," I replied, perching on the arm of his leather chair. 30 years, not many couples make it this long anymore. He smiled, relieved, mistaking serenity for surrender. "You're still the perfect wife, Isolde." "I don't tell you that enough." "Perfection takes practice," I said, kissing his forehead. "Lots of practice." He never suspected that while he slept, I was copying files from his laptop, the one he thought was password protected but wasn't, not from someone who'd watched him type the same password for 15 years, Langston 2018, the year his company went public. That weekend, I sent anonymous tips to 2 journalists I trusted, women I'd met through charity work, ones who'd built reputations on exposing corporate corruption. They didn't know the tips came from me. They only knew that something huge was brewing inside Langston Holdings, something involving falsified reports and money disappearing into offshore accounts. I watched them start digging, saw their initial articles asking questions, requesting comments from Daniel's company. He brushed them off as fake news and jealous competitors, never knowing I'd planted every seed they were now watering. By the time Daniel invited the governor to our anniversary gala, a power move meant to show his continued influence, the world was already waiting for a scandal. They just didn't know it would arrive wrapped in gold ribbon and presented by his wife. The morning of the event, I woke at 5, unable to sleep. The staff bustled around the estate, decorating with ivory roses and crystal lights, transforming our home into something beautiful and false, much like our marriage. I spent extra time choosing my dress. Not the emerald green one Daniel had bought me, not the champagne silk that matched his tie. I chose black, simple, elegant, expensive black silk that hugged my frame like a second skin. The color of mourning disguised as elegance. My makeup took an hour. Not because I was vain, but because I wanted to look perfect when I destroyed him. Strong eyebrows, sharp contour, red lipstick, the color of vengeance. I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being Daniel's wife and become something else entirely. Daniel kissed my cheek before leaving to greet the first guests, his lips cold and dry. "Ready for your big night?" he asked. I smiled, adjusting his tie. "More than you know." In my dressing room, I rehearsed my toast one final time, every syllable soft, every word laced with poison hidden in honey. I slid the flash drive into a small velvet box, his anniversary gift, the one he'd opened thinking it contained cufflinks or a watch. By the time he discovered what was really inside, his entire empire would be collapsing around him. Guests flooded the estate as the sun set, senators, CEOs, old friends who'd never liked me but adored my husband's wealth, and the doors had opened. The chandeliers glowed like 100 judging eyes. Daniel was magnetic as ever, shaking hands, making promises he'd never keep, telling jokes that made powerful men laugh. He looked untouchable. I looked patient. As the orchestra began playing Strauss, Daniel's favorite, he raised his crystal champagne flute. The room quieted instantly, trained by years of attending events where Daniel Langston spoke and everyone else listened. To 30 years, he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom, with the woman who made me whole. Who stood by me through every challenge, who built this home, who gave me the foundation to reach every success. To Isolde, my rock, my grace, my everything. The applause was thunderous. Women dabbed their eyes. Men nodded approvingly. Daniel handed me the microphone, his eyes sparkling with champagne and self-satisfaction. "Your turn, darling," he said, expecting gratitude, expecting me to play my role one final time. I stepped forward, the microphone cool against my palm. 30 years, I began, my voice steady and clear. A lifetime built on trust, or so I believed. The room fell silent, confusion rippling through the crowd. Daniel's smile faltered. I glanced toward the projector screen behind me, the one set up for a special tribute video I told the event planner to arrange. Marriage is about partnership, I continued. About honesty. About seeing your partner clearly, even when they think they're hidden. The first image appeared on the screen, a photo of Daniel kissing Sienna outside the luxury apartment. The image was crystal clear, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. Time-stamped. Undeniable. Gasps echoed through the hall like a wave breaking against rocks. "That's not," Daniel started, laughing nervously, moving toward me. "She's an employee. This is taken out of context." The next slide appeared. Bank statements showing transfers to S. Morrison, Sienna's legal name, $15,000 monthly for 18 months. Then screenshots of text messages, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Told Isolde I'm in Tokyo. He was in Chicago." The laughter died like a candle snuffed out. You could have heard a diamond earring drop. I continued speaking, my voice never wavering, each word precisely placed. Every empire hides a secret. Every powerful man believes he's untouchable. Tonight, ours hides no more. More slides flashed across the screen: shell companies in the Cayman Islands, falsified tax documents, charity funds that disappeared into private accounts, investor money used to buy jewelry for his mistress. Cameras flashed like lightning. The orchestra had stopped mid-note. Daniel turned pale, then red, then a shade of fury I'd never seen before. "Turn that off," he yelled, his composure finally cracking. He lunged toward the projector, but my assistant Claire, loyal, well-paid Claire who'd been planning this moment with me for months, pressed play on the final piece. A recording filled the room, Daniel's voice unmistakable, confident, cruel. "She's too naive to ever find out. Isolde lives in her own little world, playing house while I actually build the empire. 20 years from now, she'll still be arranging flowers and planning dinner parties, and I'll have lived 10 lifetimes she can't imagine." Sienna's voice, giggling, "Don't you feel guilty?" Daniel's response, "Guilty? For what? For wanting more than a wife who became furniture? Please." The audience murmured, the sound building like distant thunder. Several women stood and left immediately, their husbands scrambling to follow. I watched them go, my smile never wavering. Daniel turned on me, his face a mask of rage and panic. "You planned this?" 30 years deserves a memorable celebration, I replied calmly. "Don't you think?" The crowd shifted between fascination and horror, unable to look away from the train wreck of Daniel's life playing out in real time. Reporters, not society page reporters, but real journalists, the ones I'd quietly invited, captured every word, every expression, every moment of his downfall. The governor had already left through the side door, I noticed. So had several board members from Langston Holdings. The smart ones were distancing themselves before the blast radius hit them, too. Daniel's voice broke as he stared at the screen, which now showed a detailed timeline of his fraud. "You'll destroy everything. The company, the employees, our reputation." "Correction," I interrupted, taking the microphone back. "You already destroyed it. I'm just providing the lighting so everyone can see what you've done." That's when the police entered, right on schedule. They weren't there by accident. Olivia had sent them evidence hours earlier, coordinating with the district attorney's office to have officers present for Daniel's arrest. Timing was everything. 2 detectives walked straight toward Daniel, their badges gleaming under the chandelier light. "Mr. Langston, you're under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and money laundering. We need you to come with us." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Someone screamed. Glasses shattered. The string quartet abandoned their instruments and fled like the ship was sinking, which, in a way, it was. Daniel stared at me as they cuffed him, his wrists behind his back, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. "You think they'll believe you over me? You think this will stand?" I tilted my head, studying him like a specimen in a museum. "They already do. The evidence has been reviewed by 3 different attorneys, 2 forensic accountants, and the FBI's white-collar crime division. But please, keep believing you're special." The flash of cameras painted the ballroom in chaos. Photographers who'd come for a society event were now witnessing the story of the year. Guests scattered like roaches when the lights came on, whispers already turning into tomorrow's headlines. As Daniel was led away, he turned back one more time. "You'll be alone forever," he said quietly, viciously, trying to wound me one last time. I smiled, genuinely this time. "Then I'll finally have good company." The doors closed behind him, and the ballroom fell into stunned silence. I placed the microphone down carefully, adjusted my wedding ring, soon to be removed, and said into the silence, "Thank you all for coming. The truth was always tonight's theme. Please, enjoy the rest of the evening. The champagne is already paid for." When the doors finally closed on the last guest, the vultures in designer dresses and the investors suddenly pretending they'd always had doubts about Daniel, I walked into the garden alone. The night smelled like rain and freedom, 2 scents I'd almost forgotten existed together. I could hear sirens fading in the distance, carrying Daniel toward a holding cell where his charm would mean nothing, where his name would be just another entry in a ledger of the corrupt. Olivia met me under the gazebo, her heels clicking against the stone path. "You did it, Isolde." "I survived it," I corrected, pulling off my earrings, heavy diamonds that suddenly felt like chains. "There's a difference." She handed me a small envelope, thick with documents. Inside were transfer confirmations, every asset I'd safeguarded, every penny I'd quietly moved, now legally and irrevocably in my name. The prenuptial agreement that was supposed to protect Daniel had instead protected me, thanks to clauses about criminal activity and infidelity that his lawyer hadn't thought to revise. For 30 years, I'd built a cage with him, brick by brick, smile by smile. Tonight, I walked out holding not just the key, but the deed to everything he thought he owned. The following week was a hurricane of media attention. News anchors replayed the footage from the gala, analyzing every frame like the Zapruder film. Talk shows debated my morality, some called me vindictive, a gold digger who'd orchestrated a public execution. Others called me brave, a hero for women who'd suffered in silence. I ignored them all. I'd already decided I owed no one an explanation, no justification for refusing to be a victim quietly. Daniel's mistress, Sienna, vanished from social media overnight. Her apartment was emptied, her phone disconnected. Rumor had it she'd fled to Europe, though whether that was true or just wishful thinking on her part, I neither knew nor cared. Daniel's board resigned en masse, releasing statements about being shocked and dismayed by revelations they'd probably suspected for years but ignored because Daniel made them money. The company's stock plummeted. Investors sued. Everything Daniel had built began to crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. Olivia managed the fallout like a maestro conducting a symphony of destruction. She fielded calls from reporters, negotiated with prosecutors, and ensured that my name remained separate from Daniel's crimes. I was a victim, not an accomplice. One afternoon, as we sat in her office reviewing documents, she asked, "Do you feel guilty?" I considered the question carefully, staring out at the city skyline. No. Guilt belongs to liars, not survivors. He had 30 years to choose differently. This was always where his choices would lead, I just lit the way. At night, I'd sit on the balcony of my estate, listening to the wind over the empty pool. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was earned, hard-won, sacred. Then, 2 weeks after the arrest, the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, which usually meant a reporter or someone's assistant. I almost didn't answer. "Mrs. Langston," a male voice said, smooth but cold, professional in a way that raised alarm bells. "Your husband isn't finished." I froze, my wine glass halfway to my lips. "He's in custody awaiting trial." "For now," the caller said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "But money buys many favors. Judges, guards, and convenient delays. You humiliated him publicly. Did you really think that would be the end?" The line went dead before I could respond. I sat in the growing darkness, staring at the phone, realizing the war wasn't over, it had just changed battlefields. Daniel had always been resourceful, always had connections that ran deeper than I'd known. Of course, he'd try to fight back. I smiled faintly, poured another glass of wine, and whispered, "Then I'll keep my dress pressed." Because if Daniel wanted another round, I was still the woman who planned anniversaries and funerals with the same attention to detail. The next morning, I called Olivia and Marcus, my investigator, a former FBI agent who'd done very well in private practice by being very thorough and very discreet. "Daniel's planning something," I told them. I got a call. Marcus leaned back in his chair, unperturbed. Men like him always have contingency plans. The question is, what's his? We spent 3 days digging deeper, pulling threads I'd left loose during my initial investigation. What we found made my blood run cold. Daniel had been moving money for years, not just to hide his affair or skim from the company. He'd been building an escape fund, distributed across multiple accounts under false names, in countries that didn't have extradition treaties with the United States. one name kept appearing: Elaine Carver. A financial consultant with offices in 3 countries, a spotless record, and a client list that reads like a who's who of people trying to disappear. She's his exit strategy, Marcus said, showing me surveillance photos. Has been for at least 5 years. Elaine Carver was more than just a name, she was the infrastructure behind Daniel's confidence. Beautiful, mid-40s, with the kind of polished professionalism that made people trust her with their secrets. And their money. I arranged to meet her, posing as a potential client referred by a friend. Her office was in a gleaming high-rise, all glass and steel and the illusion of transparency. She greeted me with a dazzling smile, her handshake firm and practiced. "Mrs. Langston," she said warmly, showing no recognition of my face from the news. Either she was very good or genuinely hadn't connected the dots. "It's a pleasure. Please, sit." Her office was filled with awards. All bought with deception, I imagined. As she poured coffee from a crystal carafe, I studied her. Calm. Controlled. Trained in manipulation. She didn't flinch when I mentioned my husband's trial. "Terrible business," she said sympathetically. "Men do foolish things under pressure. The key is protecting what matters most: assets, family, future." I leaned forward, adding cream to my coffee slowly. "And women clean up the mess, don't they?" "We're always cleaning up their messes." Her smile faltered, just for a moment. A crack in the porcelain. That was my confirmation. That night, I went through Daniel's old phone records again, the ones I'd copied months ago. There she was, calling Elaine every night at midnight for months before my discovery. He hadn't just cheated with youth and beauty. He'd partnered with cunning and experience. I sent Marcus to follow her. Within a week, he returned with a file thick enough to choke on: photos of meetings with Daniel's lawyer, quiet transactions at private banks, and one particular dinner where she handed a briefcase to a courier in what looked like a scene from a spy movie. Inside that briefcase, according to Marcus's source, were new identities. Passports, bank cards, credit histories, and social security numbers. Escape plans for at least 3 people. Daniel was planning to run. And he wasn't planning to run alone. "He'll try to flee," I told Olivia at our next meeting. "I want to make sure he doesn't." She raised an eyebrow, a slight smile playing at her lips. "You planning another gala?" "Something quieter," I replied. "But just as final." We set the trap carefully, using the same attention to detail I'd used for the anniversary celebration. Through a mutual contact, someone who owed me favors dating back years, I leaked word to Daniel's inner circle. A rumor, carefully planted: a small part of his fortune had slipped past the authorities, hidden in a private vault under my maiden name, Isolde Thorne. It was bait, pure and simple. I knew Daniel's pride wouldn't resist the idea that I'd kept something from him, that I'd outsmarted him in even the smallest way. He'd see it as a loose end, a final score to settle. 2 nights later, he took it. Marcus tracked him leaving his safe house. He'd been released on bail thanks to one of those judges the mysterious caller had mentioned. Disguised in a cheap hat and sunglasses that made him look more suspicious than invisible, fake passport in his jacket pocket, he headed to an address I'd carefully provided. Elaine drove, her silver Mercedes navigating through the city with practiced ease. They arrived at the vault location, one that didn't actually exist, just an office building I'd rented for exactly this purpose, and police were already waiting. I watched the footage from my living room, Marcus having set up cameras to capture everything. Coffee in hand, feet curled under me, I observed Daniel's world collapse a second time. The officers found the bag of cash he'd brought, money he'd somehow smuggled out before the asset freeze. They found the forged papers, multiple passports with his photo and different names. And they found the documents connecting Elaine to every illegal transfer, every hidden account, every step of his planned escape. Both were arrested without a word, Elaine's expensive lawyer arriving too late to prevent the handcuffs. "Checkmate," I murmured, taking a sip of coffee. My reflection in the darkened window looked unfamiliar, older, yes, but also sharper, clearer, somehow more myself than I'd been in decades. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't need to perform. I could simply be. The news exploded again, even bigger than before. Langston caught attempting escape with accomplice. Every channel replayed the footage of him being led away in handcuffs for the second time, his disguise making him look pathetic rather than clever. Every headline crowned me the wife who outplayed the millionaire, the woman who brought down an empire, and, my personal favorite, the perfect wife's perfect revenge. I received letters from women I'd never met. Wives, mothers, daughters, all thanking me for proving that silence wasn't weakness, that patience could be power, that grace and vengeance weren't opposites but partners. One letter stood out, written in careful handwriting on expensive stationery. Thank you for reminding us that class doesn't mean surrender. You've given hope to those of us who thought staying meant dying slowly. I kept that letter in my grandmother's desk, next to the journal where I'd documented Daniel's betrayals. Evidence of both pain and victory. At the final court session, Daniel refused to look at me. His lawyers pleaded for leniency, painting him as a man driven to desperation by a vindictive spouse. The prosecutor, armed with evidence that would make an encyclopedia jealous, systematically destroyed every argument. The judge denied bail for the escape attempt. Elaine, smart enough to know when she'd lost, turned witness, trading her loyalty for survival. Her statement sealed his fate, adding years to his potential sentence. Afterward, she approached me in the corridor, her designer suit replaced with something simpler, her confidence fractured. He said you'd never have the courage, she told me quietly. I met her gaze steadily. He mistook silence for fear. It's a common mistake men make. She nodded slowly, something like respect in her eyes. He did that to everyone. Made us all feel smaller than we were. As she walked away, I realized something chilling. She wasn't my enemy anymore. She was just another woman who'd once believed him, who'd traded her integrity for his promises. The real enemy had always been the illusion, the lie we all bought into about who Daniel Langston really was. The sentencing came 3 months later. The courtroom was full. Press, spectators, vultures dressed in suits, hoping to catch a final glimpse of the mighty fallen. Daniel sat with his head high, pretending dignity he'd never truly possessed. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, he barely blinked. 15 years minimum, with the possibility of more pending investigation of additional charges. As he was led away, he turned to me one final time. You'll be alone forever, he said quietly, trying one last time to wound me where he thought I was weakest. I smiled, the expression genuine and bright. Then I'll finally have good company. The flashbulbs followed me as I exited the courthouse. The air outside was crisp, October air that tasted like beginnings. The same trees that had witnessed my arrival as a young bride 30 years ago now watched me leave as someone entirely different. Freedom felt strange. The estate was quiet but no longer empty. I walked through the rooms over the following weeks, touching furniture that once symbolized a cage, deciding what to keep and what to burn. I kept one of his old photos, not as a memory, but as a reminder. A warning to my future self, never again. Olivia suggested I move away, start fresh somewhere no one knew my story. Change your name, she offered. Begin again as someone new. No, I replied firmly. He tried to erase me, tried to make me disappear into his shadow. I want my name to stand. Isolde Langston, not his wife, but the woman who survived him. So I began writing articles about financial abuse, interviews about recognizing manipulation, and even a memoir proposal that publishers fought over like dogs with a bone. The world that once pitted me now admired me. And every word I spoke was for the women who'd stayed too long, who'd loved too hard, who'd forgotten that patience and power can share the same heart. The following year, I hosted my own charity event. Not at the estate, which I'd sold for a sum that made even Olivia gasp, but at a beautiful hotel downtown. This time, it was mine alone, no lies, no hidden accounts, no facade. The theme was rebuilding grace. Guests came expecting tragedy, they left speaking about resilience. Halfway through the evening, a young journalist asked, "What advice would you give to women betrayed by love?" I smiled, looking around the room at the faces watching me, some curious, some skeptical, some desperately hopeful. "Don't rush revenge," I said carefully. "Let it age, like fine wine. The longer it sits, the stronger it burns. But more than that, don't let vengeance consume what's left of your life. Use it as fuel, then let it go. The real victory isn't his destruction. It's your survival." Applause filled the room, genuine and warm. Somewhere in that sound, I heard closure, like a door finally swinging shut on a chapter I'd been writing for 3 decades. A month later, Olivia visited with the final documents, the divorce finalized, the estate cleared, every legal tie severed. "It's done," she said, pouring champagne in my new apartment, smaller but entirely mine. I laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar in my own ears. It's strange how peace feels quieter than revenge. Softer. Like I'd forgotten what silence sounds like when it's not filled with lies. She clinked her glass against mine. "To endings," she toasted. I smiled. "To beginnings disguised as endings." As night fell, I walked out to my small balcony overlooking the city. The lights shimmered beneath me, alive, unbothered, beautiful in their chaos. I realized that revenge hadn't made me cruel. It had made me honest, stripped away the performance, and revealed something truer underneath. On what would have been our 31st anniversary, my first alone, I sent a small package to the prison. Inside was a photo from the gala night, the moment when his world began to crumble, and a note that read, "Here's to 30 years and one unforgettable evening. Thank you for the lessons. I've learned them well. No anger. No regret. Just the quiet triumph of a woman who learned that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it